Welcome to MSL Presents A Question of Law, produced by the Massachusetts School of Law and seen nationwide. Today, we shall discuss a book written by a non-practicing lawyer, Debra Dickerson's An American Story. Ms. Dickerson, a graduate of the Harvard Law School, wrote this book because she believed the story of the black working class and the story of how an African American rose from an economically impoverished background to Harvard Law School and beyond are stories worth telling. They are stories worth telling. Joining me today to discuss her book, her life, and her views is Debra Dickerson, and I am Lawrence R. Velvel, the Dean of the Massachusetts School of Law. Ms. Dickerson, and call me Larry if you wouldn't. I hope I can call you Debra.
Please.
We've been doing that before the show. Tell the audience why you wrote the book, what were the stories that you wanted to tell, and why did you think they were important?
I think you summed it up in your introduction. I think these stories, if I had to pick one thing, I wrote this book because I want people to understand that there's nothing special about me. I get a lot of pats on the back. Oh, you're so wonderful. You went to Harvard. You were in the military. You're a good girl. You never got in trouble. And you've accomplished a lot without a whole lot of help. Wow, aren't you special and wonderful? And that bothers me because I think that's a way of turning your back societally on all those other people because they're sort of lost causes. And to put me out there as someone, this is what used to be known as being a credit to the race, you know. And I just want to make it clear that the inner city is full, and probably trailer parks and barrios are full of people just like me. Because if the inner cities weren't full of people just like me, there'd be flames in the sky every night. This country would be ungovernable. I am the kind of person who made it, who wasn't supposed to. And because I did, I can speak for a lot of people who are otherwise voiceless.
And if I understand correctly the book and what you were trying to say, fundamentally you think that the story you're telling, which you think is or could be prototypical of so many people, is the story of the black working class and the working class more generally, and also the people who were caught up in what has been called in this country, starting perhaps in the 20s and 30s, and of course expanding mightily in World War II, the Great Migration, the movement of people from the South to the North.
I identify with that so closely. I've always thought of this book, and I fought to call this book Daughter of the Great Migration. My publisher talked me out of it because they thought that it de-universalized the story and that it would give people a license to say, well, I'm a Vietnamese immigrant, this has no relevance to me, I'm Jewish, this has no relevance. And I think they're right, but personally, I see myself as a daughter of the Great Migration. That tells you everything you need to know about me. I have this very firm, fundamentalist, disciplined background, married to this northern opportunity that my parents migrated from the deep south to give their children. And I was able to marry those two and just to really sort of bring about my own version of the American dream.
Well, I'm not a publisher, and so my view doesn't count, but I think Daughter of the Great Migration would have been a great title.
Me too.
Ultimately, at age 30, roughly, you went to law school. Why did you do that?
Oh, I had big reasons and I had little reasons. Some of the little reasons were that I had had such a checkered educational past and I had had such yearnings mixed with such self-hatred and low self-esteem. I can do anything, I can't do anything. And I'd always loved school. And by the time, I think I was 33 when I started law school, by then there had just been so much water under the bridge for me intellectually and experientially and in terms of my own maturity that I thought law school would be a lot of fun. And I really that was my idea. Instead of going to Disneyland, I'm going to go to law school. It was the pure intellectualism of it. The other
fun is not a mistake most people would make about law school.
I'm maybe one of the few people in history to have a good time in law school and to have a lot of extra time. I wrote a novel in law school. I started writing in law school. But also I needed to go to law school and just kick its butt. I needed to go to the bastion of everything that America had been telling me I couldn't aspire to, that I wasn't good enough for, and just look it in the eye, you know, and shake it by the lapels and say, you know, here, Harvard, I could. And so I did that. And also on a more defensible level. By then I
That's not indefensible.
By then I had become so politicized. I had been radicalized at one point, but then I sort of swung back to merely politicized about social issues and race and gender, but most of all class. And whereas most of my life I'd been sort of single-mindedly devoted to improving my life, I came to understand that my life was emblematic of millions of other have-nots who were being kept in their place as fodder for this system. And I really wanted to, beyond keeping my own belly full, I really saw a need for people like me to get in there and fight for people who were voiceless and who had no purchase on this system in every way, legal, capitalistic, the police state, who are just pawns. And I thought people like me, I can bring something to this discussion.
If I understand correctly, you were very impressed with the fact that attorneys are people who, just by dint of their badge, so to speak, of their degree, they have some power in this country and the ability to get things done.
I think in a way that is not true in any other country.
No doubt, no doubt. Law dean shouldn't say this, but we're the most over-lawyered country in the world, far and away.
That's why I don't practice. I'm doing my part. Yeah.
Right, to relieve the congestion. Thank
to
you.
relieve the congestion in the hallways of courthouses.
Thank you. And you always saw, maybe you can, what you wanted to do is particularly interesting because, as I understand it from the book, you always saw the law as the tool of the oppressor. You might want to tell people some of the events that happened to you that led you to that conclusion.
Yeah, I don't think every lawyer is a tool of oppression, but I think you sort of have to be paying attention not to be. Growing up, my parents, no education, no savings, no nothing, no belief. I was a little kid during the Civil Rights Movement, and my parents had the wherewithal to move north to escape the oppression of Mississippi and Tennessee and sharecropping in the 30s and 40s, but they didn't aspire to more than that. They didn't say, we shall overcome and we're going to join the marches and our kids can do anything. They didn't think that. They thought, get a job, hold on to it for dear life, and whoa, if you all could just get office jobs, what a wonderful world. So I wasn't raised to question anything. And we were pawns to whatever vagaries of the police. I remember going down south, my father would get pulled over and that sort of thing. We were pawns. And then as I got a little older and started to come face to face myself with the legal system, I couldn't believe how obviously skewed it was. I had a car accident when I was 18 or 19 that was completely not my fault. Some guy ran a light, ran into me. My car was totaled and he pushed me into the lane and my car hit another car. So none of this was my fault. My car was totaled. Nice little girl that I am. I was like, oh, well, all's well that ends well. No, an insurance company that insured the guy that I was pushed into sues me and it's going to make me pay for the other guy's car. And they thought it was completely beside the fact that it wasn't my fault. Like, oh, we know it's not your fault, but legally. Well, how could that be legal and moral? Well, obviously it's not moral. And when you know it's not my fault and you say that's not the point, and so I had grown up with this notion of lawyers as heroes. Atticus Finch was one of my heroes. Thurgood Marshall, all that was in the back of my mind. Right. And now I realize that those lawyers are the exception. These are not, and these were lawyers screaming at a little poor black kid. And we ended up having to borrow thousands of dollars to pay that off. Now, if I'd had access to a lawyer, they were probably lying, but it was terrible. But these people did this for a living, and I was so demoralized by that. I had grown up thinking in the back of my mind when I was feeling confident, I want to be a lawyer someday. But when this happened, I said, absolutely not. I will not be a lawyer. It's the same. It's a horrible thing. So, and I didn't know all the different kinds of lawyers there were. And so a few more years go by, and again, it was a car. I bought a brand new car from Chrysler that never ran. It did not run.
From day one?
From day one.
Yeah.
They tried to fix it. Well, no, I was able to drive it home from the dealership, but the next day,
from day two,
the next day, I went to the movies with a friend. We're driving along, and it just cut off in the middle of the road. I could have been killed. I could have killed someone else, and I had it towed back to the place. And I believe that they tried diligently to fix it. And clearly, it was some wire that wasn't touching something else, and they couldn't fix it. And they said, "Well, okay, sorry, but keep up the payments. Don't miss a payment." What do you mean, don't miss a payment? The car doesn't run. Give me another car, please. And these people laughed in my face. This was 1983, early 84. I was in the military. I'm wearing my uniform. Who should be more societally approved of than me? I'm paying my bills on time. I'm going to school at night. I desperately need this car. I'm working all day as a service person, going to school at night. The school's very far away. And these people say, not our problem, but don't you miss a payment, you're in trouble. And when you're in the military, and this was in a dense military area, these people know that one word to the military hierarchy. And so I went to the military because I bought the car through the Air Force and said, hey, help me, these people. And they said, well, we can't get involved with that. Yes, we will force you to make the payments, but we will not do anything with them. And if you don't keep up the payments, it will negatively affect your performance value. So society is teaming up on me. I went to all these lawyers, and they said, oh, we're not going to take on Chrysler. Sorry, just keep making. And then they would all say, make sure you keep making the payments. Right. As if there was some equation between that and my character, you know. Right. And it wasn't like, oh, they'll chew you up and spit you out. It was like, don't you make those payments. So I waged the one lawyer, I just sort of lost in his office. I started crying. I couldn't, it was an entire paycheck went to pay for this car because my mother had talked me into not buying a used car because you buy somebody else's problem. Well, I had my own personal original problem. So one of the lawyers, when he just saw how upset I was, had a heart. And he said, well, my mother-in-law one time waged a letter writing campaign and got a refund from MasterCard or something. So I didn't know what else to do, so I took 3 days off from work and I waged this letter writing campaign. I wrote to everybody, President, Congress, everybody, hundreds of letters. And that's the only way I was able to get my money back. But if I hadn't had a flexible job that allowed me 3 days off, if I hadn't had a decent education to learn how to research corporate structures and committees, I was completely on my own. Whose side is society on there?
And Chrysler, if I remember, was really quite shocked at what happened, and somebody more or less asked you at the end after they gave you, who else did you write?
Yeah, but in terror, like who else can we expect to hear from? Now, in America Giveth and America Taketh Away, I did get a lot of response from my state senator, Congress people, that sort of thing. Average rank and file people, librarians who were appalled, but because they saw this as their fight too. And I got so many people reached out to me and said, oh, I bought this lemon 10 years ago. And I realized then too, starting to understand that my story is wrapped up with everybody else's story. I could see now how cousins of mine would get in trouble in a situation like this. My cousin's like, Deb, just let me torch the car for you, or it'll be stolen. And how many poor people have gotten into trouble with their backs against the wall in a situation like that, who didn't have, what if the letter writing campaign hadn't worked for me? What would I have done then? Would it have been immoral for me to torch the car or have it stolen? But we know society would have acted very swiftly then if they had caught me. So it was then I started to get the notion that, oh, I was sort of wrong before. Instead of turning my back on the legal system, which you can't turn your back on, you're always subject to it. What I need to do is learn how to master this situation and make Chrysler eat dirt, in a court of law and not with a pretty please letter writing campaign. And when people came to me, I was working in a big government agency, people came to me from all over the building, teary-eyed, oh, I had amassed this big pile of information. Could you write some letter? And people had these incredible tales about cars that didn't run and houses where the foundations were crumbling. Who fights for these people if you can't afford a lawyer, which is the majority of people? So somebody's got to fight for these people.
We are going to take a very short break for a public service announcement, and when we come back, perhaps you can then tell us, Deborah, about the background you came from. We'll be right back.
I'm Paul Victor, Chairman of the Board of Trustees at the Massachusetts School of Law at Andover. I'm a lawyer at a large New York City law firm specializing in antitrust and international trade law. With such a background, why do I serve on MSL's Board of Trustees? It's simple. When I was a kid, I lived in Brooklyn where my family struggled and worked hard to make a living. I helped out from the time I was a teenager. Law school, however, gave me a chance to improve my life and to help both my extended family, the community at large, and myself. The law school experience that helped me change my life is offered to our students by MSL. The school gives people a rigorous education and opens the door to opportunity. I think that's great, really very important, and want to do what I can to help this institution provide that opportunity to others. That's why I serve on MSL's board and strongly support what MSL is doing.
What inspired David to spend a lifetime exploring distant planets?
Star Trek.
What inspired Nicole to bring new life into the world?
The first time I saw St. Elsewhere.
And what inspired Stephen to risk his life for others?
Hill Street Blues.
Television. Who will it inspire next?
You know how inquisitive kids are. That's why you store sharp objects in a safe place. Keep medicines out of reach. And if you have a gun, you keep it unloaded and locked away. As concerned members of the television community, we urge you to be just as careful with television. Kids don't always know what they're watching. That's why you should.
Welcome back. Deborah, why don't you tell the audience about your background, the values you grew up with, where they came from, how they impacted you and your sisters, your brother, and so forth.
Well, as I said, both my parents were great migration sharecroppers, weaned on the Depression, so they're already in a bad situation, made much worse by the fact that there's a depression going on. My mother in the Delta of Mississippi, my father in Covington, Tennessee. At least my mother's mother died in childbirth, having her 9th, but my mother had a huge family, huge extended family. And so she didn't grow up nearly as bitter as my father did, whose family was decimated by tuberculosis, and he was orphaned when he was a little kid. And he kept his sister until he was 10 or 11, and then she died of tuberculosis. And he also, I just found out, had an infant brother who died as an infant. So he was raised by an alcoholic, abusive grandfather, which I didn't know until I was a lot older, who beat everybody and didn't work. And my father had to bring in the cotton crop on his own. He's 10, 11, 12, while defending his grandmother and sister. And it was just a bleak, brutal, you know, and he had such a bitterness about the racism. I think, he's dead now, so I can't ask him, but I attribute it to the fact of how he had to go and beg, you know, the guy that owned the land for more time and more credit because his grandfather. And that, I think that led into how severe he was in raising us girls. He had 5, so he joined the Marines during World War II, which I think is odd, given how much he said he hated America and white people, but he fought.
It made a tremendous impact on his life.
He never recovered. My father was a United States Marine till the day he died, and I think that was directly responsible for me joining the military 40 years later. And I very much drew on his gritty, you know, what I found at the time, oppressive memories of World War II that he just loved so much, but I very much drew on them and all through my life. So
he had seen some pretty heavy stuff too.
Right, and not a lot of the Black Marines saw fighting, but I have his papers and stuff, and he did hand-to-hand combat, and he island hopped the Marianas, Okinawa. He was at the Battle of Okinawa, and he must have felt he was a teenager. He must have felt so victorious after this life. He never got over it. He wore fatigues till the day he died. He would do Marine calisthenics every day, and our house was like a Marine barracks. No dust, white gloves. You know, Saturday morning inspections, hospital corners, everything had to be spick and span, no trash in the trash cans, no water in the sinks. When I got to basic training, I was like, this is life, you know, there's no big deal. But it was a very structured and it was very disciplined. We got the snot beat out of us. They would clearly be called abuse today. Back then, it was just child rearing. I mean, there was something wrong with you if your kid acted up at church and you didn't take him into the basement and beat him so that everybody could hear him screaming. We got smacked around quite a bit. My mother hit us too, but the difference was it never went beyond discipline with my mother. With my father, his house was the one place he ruled. That's the one place he wasn't a nigger. That's the one place that he wasn't going to be gainsaid. And as his teenage wife and little kids grew up and started saying, well, why, Daddy, and why can't we do this, and disagreeing, it drove him bananas. And the way he kept control was by fear. And so by the time I was 10 or 11 years old, I couldn't speak in his presence because he was a big, rough, tough Marine with big muscles, and he was a truck driver, and he had 5 girls. That was God's big joke on him, you know, and 1 boy, but my brother was the 6th. And their marriage deteriorated, our household just deteriorated. And I was a little kid. My mother left him when I was 12 or 13, and I hadn't spoken a civil word to him beyond yes, sir, and no, sir, in years. And he died when I was in high school with nothing having been resolved. But the legacy of all that was we weren't allowed to socialize and hang out, and kids weren't driven around and catered to then the way they were. And there were 6 of us and 2 parents. Now there's 2 parents and 1 kid, if you're lucky. And so kids were not catered to in that way, and our wishes were not very important. We were lucky to have a roof over our heads and food on the table. My father was sort of an itinerant truck driver who just sort of carted around debris, and that's where all of our toys and clothes and stuff came from, were things that he found. And my mother was a waitress
He
and
would
a
put
cook.
things together.
Right, and we, whatever it was, we had to use it. There was no such thing as too broken to use or too spoiled. I mean, food that was clearly spoiled, we would still have to eat it. And, you know, things that were boots that didn't zip and coats without buttons and that sort of thing.
And yet, out of all this, and through your mother as well, came as I understand it, Deborah, a tremendous sense of discipline, a tremendous sense of productivity, a tremendous sense of get the job done and do it the right way. All the
And
things that
keep your
help.
whining to a minimum. You know, life is hard. What do you want from us?
Yeah.
And there was no sugarcoating of things. Like, life is tough. Oh, there's nothing to eat. Well, go to bed. You won't know you're hungry. And it was bleak, and it certainly, you know, left me with this residue of neurosis. But at the same time, I would not have survived my life. I would not have survived the chances that I've taken. I would not have survived the terrible things that have happened to me. And I would not have kept my head, I think, now that I'm successful, without that background. So yeah, there's some bad things that hamstring me. But I think they're overwhelmed by, you know, my sense of hard work. And I think the thing that really that's most remains with me is this incredible sense of family. I'd rather spend time with family than any friend I ever made. And it's very old-fashioned, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to pass that on to my children. All I can do is sit there, well, when I was a kid. But it set the stage for every success I had in life. And once they coupled that with moving us up north, then the doors were open for us to walk through.
One of the things that is extraordinarily striking about your book is that even starting from the time you learned to read as a young girl, you were probably the most omnivorous reader, with one possible exception that I know of somebody who might have been as voracious a reader as you were, that I've ever heard of. And tell us how that came about and what impact that had on your life.
Well, let me just say that I was a voracious reader, but I'm not sure I was a very discerning reader. I think a lot of things went over my head. I can remember now reading some things that I clearly had no business reading. And I know I read some things that went way over my head. Erskine Caldwell comes to mind.
You had no business reading Erskine
I
Caldwell.
had no business. But my parents were so deferential to authority and the authority of this nicely bound book from the public library. Hey, they never questioned what I was reading. I don't know. I was a born nebbish. I was a born nerd. When I was from the earliest I can remember, I was the brainiac. I was the smart kid. And I just loved books. I mean, our little world was so close. Like I said, our only social outlet was church. Choir practice Wednesday night, church all day Sunday. Movies were a huge event when I was a little kid. You dressed up for them. And with 6 kids and 2 parents, we didn't go very often. And this stuff didn't exist. ESPN Zone and laser tag and computers. Kids had to make their own world. And I think I early discovered that in books, I could go around the world in 20 days. I could go 20,000 leagues under the sea. I could go on the moors with Heathcliff and Cathy. I could mutiny on the Bounty. I could go to the South Seas. And in books, because our home was so straight-laced and your wants were just not very important. If you were hungry, tired, sleepy, it doesn't matter. You're alive and you got a roof over your head. But in books, my emotions mattered. I'd sit there reading with tears streaming down my face or laughing so hard. And that was a place where I didn't have to be decorous and calm and quiet. I could go off in a corner and laugh my head off and read a passage 5 times. So my feelings, and I was free in books. And the more I read, the freer I could be. And as our household became more and more a danger zone, books. In the bathroom, going up and down the steps, I walked out into traffic. I lived my whole life in books.
Do you think there was any downside to the reading of books? I mean, did you, for example, get ideas in your head that as a young person, as an older person, you might reject, as a younger person, you had no background to reject?
I clearly, when I said I wasn't a discerning reader, I read some things that were clearly, I didn't know anything about black literature until I taught myself in my 20s. I didn't know anything about the Harlem Renaissance. I didn't know black people could write books until I stumbled across Maya Angelou's first memoir when I was in my late teens. So I didn't say, man, I wish I could read about black people, but I definitely understood that I could read these books, but I couldn't really exist in them. They weren't for me. I was allowed to watch them, but I could never imagine myself as Cathy. You know, I could never imagine myself as Madame Bovary. I could never be, that was for white people. And there was clearly, I would read things that were insulting and derogatory, Sambo. I read a lot of fables and fairy tales and stuff like that. But I don't think on a conscious level, I said, wow, that was really insulting. No, that never happened. But I think I stored these things away. And it fed into in the book I talk a lot about my years of self-hatred and, and hating other black people and being afraid of them.
And that was partly because you lived in two different worlds. You lived in a white world too for a while, so explain that briefly if you will.
Well, I in the 1967 or so, as a direct result of the Civil Rights Movement, I was in the very early integration class of the gifted elementary program in North St. Louis. St. Louis was firmly racially segregated when I was a kid. North side black, south side white, working whites, suburbs, white people with money. And to get into this program was this incredible thing. My parents debated about it forever, but I really wanted to go, not because I wanted to strike a blow for racial freedom or for women, but I just wanted more school. I wanted better school. My neighborhood school had stopped being challenging. And everybody hated me because I had no social skills. I was always correcting people and arguing with the teachers and that sort of stuff. And I was a really good girl. I was the hall monitor. I was the teacher's pet. I didn't know how to sort of go along to get along. If I knew the answer, like, oh, you're wrong, it's 2 + 2,
And at the white school, they were teaching you things that made you devalue.
Absolutely. You'd go home. The one example I always remember is cup and table, as opposed to cup and saucer. Yeah. And instead of being mad that people's futures get decided on these tests on the basis of, oh, he's stupid, he doesn't know, it's nobody used cup and saucer. A saucer would be something to eat off in my house. You don't put a cup on but I knew from my reading, and it set me apart from people in the neighborhood, and I would think them stupid for getting that wrong on the test.
Your description of what that young kid, that little boy said, and you wrote it in dialect, about who the hell be using a cup and saucer around here? I mean,
nobody.
It really said it all. It really said it all. We'll be right back.
Can you tell which of these children was not born free? Can you tell which of these children was not born equal? Can you tell which of these children does not deserve to be treated with dignity? We can't either. Human right number 1. We are all born free and equal.
At the new American College of History and Legal Study in Salem, New Hampshire, you can finish your bachelor's degree affordably and get on the fast track to law school. We teach American history, and you'll receive a rigorous education at a very low cost. The small day and evening classes allow you to interact closely with the distinguished faculty. At the American College of History and Legal Studies, professors don't lecture. Through the discussion method of teaching, you'll be engaged in the issues raised in class. You'll learn to be a critical thinker, a better writer, and a polished public speaker. And you'll be able to compete with anybody in today's competitive marketplace. You can also get on the fast track to law school. Qualified students gain early admission into the Massachusetts School of Law. The new American College of History and Legal Studies offers the junior and senior years of undergraduate education. To finish your bachelor's degree, with the opportunity to start your law degree early, call or visit today.
Massachusetts School of Law. Legal education that is practical, accessible, affordable, and enjoyable. Offering flexible day and evening classes, full or part-time studies, where candidates are assessed not on the LSAT, but their academic and other accomplishments, providing more professional skills training than any other law school in New England. Massachusetts School of Law. Visit us at mslaw.edu, training students to become successful lawyers and advocates, not just legal scholars.
Welcome back. Let's go on now to the reasons why, indeed the street corner epiphany, if you will, the reasons why you went to college, what you found there, particularly with regard to this philosophy professor, and what caused you to turn to the military, and after that, which is quite a bit in itself, we'll go on from there.
Well, I wasn't going to go to college because even though I loved school, or I hated high school, but I only hated it because it was so unchallenging. It was just a warehouse, a place where we were stored all day. Elementary school, which was a gifted school, I loved. Socially, it was soul destroying because of the unresolved racial issues, but intellectually, it was heaven. High school was just a torture. It was just this place where we were just supposed to not get in trouble. And so I was taking secretarial courses because, you know, all through elementary school, my teachers had been telling me I was going to make a fine secretary someday. So I believed that, but I didn't believe I could go to college. So I wasn't going to go to college, even though there was some interest from colleges, but I just didn't have the self-esteem, and no one at my college, none of the counselors said, yes, you can do it. This, you know, not even tried to get me into a local school or anything like that. So
And colleges would call you, and you didn't know what to say, and you'd put down the phone.
I wouldn't talk to them because without reinforcement from home, which my parents couldn't give, no one in my neighborhood could give, because the black bourgeoisie, which there was as far attenuated from the black rank and file as the white upper class. So it wasn't that I had black doctors and that sort of thing to look to. No one at my school was trying to help me. And so these places would call, these really good schools, Oberlin and places where they were trying so hard, but I would pretend, I'd answer the phone and pretend not to be me. Oh, Deborah's not here, you know, and I'd have my sister talk to them, or I'd just leave the phone on the table until I heard them hang up. Because I could have gone to college, but I think if I had, I would have been one of those kids in the psychiatric ward I just was not ready emotionally, mature in terms of maturity. And so late in August, I didn't fill out one college application. Late in August, and I clearly I was depressed all summer. Clearly I should have been on Prozac. I should have been in an institution. I slept all day long when I wasn't working. And then by the end of the summer, I couldn't sleep at all. And I'm just wandering around. My life is over. I can see my life ending. And one morning, we had these bars on our window, and I was looking out. It was very early in the morning, and I was just looking out the window. And for some reason, the scene that I had seen every morning of my life forever, I don't know, it was as if I saw it in a different way, with different eyes. Then the same crowd of work-worn, exhausted women who just got out of bed, standing at this bus stop in their cheap uniforms. They're working in cafeterias, they're working in hospitals, emptying bedpans, they're janitors, cheap shoes, you know, they're all carrying huge shopping bags of whatever poor black women are always carrying. And I could look at them and I could recreate their last 24 hours, you know, up all night with a house full of kids, doing laundry, pressing hair, making sandwiches, arguing with, you know, the estranged husband. I could just see the whole thing going off to these terrible jobs, and I looked out the window. That's me. That is me. This is where I'm headed. I'm going to be these fat women in the acrylic dress with the cheap shoes, you know, going home to a house full of kids I can't feed, and a man who's angry all the time because he's so oppressed too. And it just,
Excuse me, that could be, couldn't it, the reason why your father turned out to be, well, rather stern, shall we say?
There's no doubt in my mind that his iron control at home had to do with his complete lack of control outside of the home. There's no doubt in my mind about that played some sort of a role.
Anyway, I interrupted you, I'm sorry. Yeah,
right, and that brings us to the state we are today, and the black family there's a real state of crisis among black men and black women and black parents and black children that has to do with that, but that's the subject of another book. So I looked out the window and I saw these women, and this is it. I'm my mother. You know, I'm going off to a factory every morning. You know, I'm up at dawn. I'm still up at midnight doing all the things that have to be done. Where's the life? Is this why I was born? And I just had a total panic, heart palpitations, adrenaline sweat. No, this is a horrible nightmare.
You ran off to the local junior college.
I ran off to the local junior college. It was still like very early in the morning, and I was convinced I was having a heart attack, and I just paced back and forth until somebody showed up, and I just started begging people to admit me. And they did. Thank God for community colleges.
This is after jolting Duke and Oberlin and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Don't remind me.
Yeah.
Don't remind me. But community college, which I disdained. Community college. That's nothing. I didn't think, I thought it was beneath me. I thought it was easy. It wasn't. It was challenging. And it wasn't as much work as I could do, but it was far from boring. And there were some dedicated teachers there. One in particular, a little Hawaiian woman named Dr. Edwards, who was a math teacher. There were some dedicated teachers there who really challenged me. So that was a really smart thing I did.
And one or two of them, I mean, you describe in the book, without getting into it, you began to realize quite early on, hey, I'm as smart as that guy.
Right. Or, yeah, in particular, I had one philosophy professor. Coming from my background where I was to be seen and not heard because I was a dumb old girl and all this sort of stuff, and black and poor. But even in my own household, my words were not important. And angry silence is a defining feature of my childhood. So, and I never had black teachers. If I were to count them today, and I have a bachelor's and master's and a law degree, I still don't think I've had more than 3 black teachers in my whole life. And role models are important. So anyway, I'm not about to make waves with these people who have graduate degrees, and I revere teachers. But I had this philosophy professor who was just so ridiculous. He was so full of himself. And that made him a very poor teacher because he was so convinced of his own superiority that he didn't think he had to defend it. And he was so ridiculous that I would debate him all the time in the way that I used to debate my father before he scared me to death. But Mr. Grant couldn't scare me. And so he and I would debate all the time. And one day I debated him about something. And he made this incredibly caustic remark. He just insulted me. It was meant to make me feel stupid and to shut me up. And what happened was, I think they call this a significant emotional event. I just had the kids are tittering around me, and some people are shocked. They've sort of sucked their breath in, and people are looking at me. And here's the moment that I've dreaded my entire life. This is the reason I've never complained. I keep my mouth shut. I don't make waves. That's the real reason I didn't get into trouble, is fear. It wasn't actual obedience. It was fear. Here I am in a situation I've most dreaded, and what do I feel? I don't feel stupid. I think he's stupid. If he's so much, and this is what I'm thinking, if he's so much smarter than me, why doesn't he debate me instead of calling me names and just trying to embarrass me into silence? This is really interesting. And I'm looking around the room. Yes, people are laughing at me, and I'm not dying. And so it was a really...
You survived your worst fear.
I survived my worst fear. And I always ask myself now, my husband actually asked me this just yesterday, we're trying to decide something, what's the worst thing that can happen? And now I skip to that. I try to envision what's the worst thing that can happen. People laughing at me. Well, gee, they're wrong.
Yeah. Now, from there, you really just one day, as I understood it, you just upped and joined the Air Force. It was just more or less like that.
Yeah, it was a pretty wild thing to do. The only way I can explain it is utter desperation. It's this or the French Foreign Legion. I was thinking, I was like looking for sheep ranches in the outback of Australia. This comes from reading, right? I've got to get out of North St. Louis. I was going to this community college, but I dropped out just short of graduation because I can't have a degree. Man, anybody could write a first-year psychology book about me. I'm at a 3.9 GPA, but I dropped out. And I was working all the time because things are grimmer and grimmer at home. My father's dead. People are starting to have the kids. My brother's running the streets. My mother's, trying to do it all single-handedly, so we're all working, and there's no future. I'm becoming a ghetto neighborhood woman. And I was still very depressed and just, at the same time I'd have these moments of arrogant confidence and then complete, utter disbelief in myself. And I heard about this girl that I'd gone to high school with who I thought was really cool. And I heard that she joined the Air Force, and I thought, well, because men in our neighborhood joining the military was nothing. There's a long tradition of that. But girls didn't really join. It was considered to be a lesbian thing to do. And when I heard that this really cool woman joined, I thought, okay, that's it. And on the basis of that, I didn't even know this woman. I wasn't even friends with her because she was too far above me. I said, well, if she can join the military, then I can. That was all. I went the Navy, I didn't join because they would make me swim. The Marines and the Army I didn't join because they would make me march around in the hot sun and carry things. And the Air Force wouldn't make me swim and wouldn't make me fly. This is the only research I did.
Yeah, right.
And so with no thought, I didn't have a guaranteed job, which most people have. They could have made me spray for bugs or drive a base taxi or anything.
Now, what was your experience in the military? I mean, in terms of how people treated you, leadership roles that came your way and why they came your way, what you thought about the people, so on and so forth.
The military, it was an incredibly interesting place. I am incredibly grateful to it. I would rank it second only to my parents in the positive effect on me, and second to my parents also in the negative effects on me. But what happened in the military was that they gave me what America had never consistently given me: unconditional support and encouragement. They looked at me and they saw the talents and the drive and the leadership. Leadership was never a word I would have used about myself, but I had it. And they saw it in me, and they demanded that I keep using it. When I tried to keep a low profile, they punished me. They restricted my liberty. They gave me demerits. And so I had no choice, because I didn't want to try and stand out from the pack, because I'll fail and they'll send me back to North St. Louis, and that can't happen.
You make the point, too, that among people in the working class and so on, you know, the old Japanese saying, the nail that stands up is the one that's hammered flat. They don't want to be noticed by people, because that means government's going to come down on you somehow or other.
That's definitely a residue of my peasant background, is you keep a low profile. You don't call yourself to the attention of authorities. My mother missed the first couple years of her widow's benefits because she would not she would not go into the Social Security office and apply for benefits when my father died. She knew what she was entitled to when she retired, but she was deathly afraid that she was going to get in trouble, that if you bring yourself to the attention of the government, that's a peasant attitude. Like, I pay taxes, they can arrest me and throw me in jail, but I have no right, you know, for an explanation.
Your superiors in the military, in part because their own promotions and success depend on who they bring along and how successful those people are. I mean, they actually ridiculed you into performing leadership roles.
Right. They said, oh, okay, you don't want to lead, you know, in the service and for your country. You just want to have a lot of free time. And they put it on that sort of a level. And they yelled at me, and they sneered at me. This TI that I really looked up to was giving this look like he couldn't believe, he was so disgusted by me. But but it was like, look, you can do it, Deborah. You can do it. And no one had ever said that to me before in my life. They said, we've been watching you, people look up to you, you took this test, you got this score. And so they mixed it, the encouragement and the punishment, with quantification. They quantified everything: who could fold the most socks, who could make the 45-degree sharpest horizontal angle on the hospital corners. They found a way to quantify things, and I could just say, well, okay, I did get the highest score,
you know,
didn't I?
And I think, to your surprise, if I understand it correctly, you found that the people with whom you were competing, white and black alike, and let's face it, a lot of them were white, were themselves very supportive of you. Very supportive.
Well, first of all, they were also almost entirely working class or lower middle class. So the whole class thing just ceased to apply in the military. That anybody with a pedigree would have been weird. Somebody from until you get into, even in the officer rank, most people are lower middle class, middle at best. You get a few legacies, admirals' kids, but they're in a whole different category. So class is just a non-issue anymore. Everybody's from, because rich kids don't join. And because there is such a spirit of competitiveness in the military, you can choose to compete or not, as long as you meet the minimum requirements. You can't choose to sad sack along under the minimum. That's a big taboo, and you're looked down on, and you're going to be thrown out. But those people, and we were identified, people who competed and were a cut above, and it was a friendly rivalry for the most part. And people really encouraged each other, because there's a real ethos of good sportsmanship and not quibbling. I mean, you would get demerits when I became an officer in officer training school. There was a specific category of demerits called quibbling. And if you got in trouble for something, or if somebody beat you in something, and you were like, well, but the professor liked her better or whatever. No, it's quibbling. And so there was a real ethos of sort of good sportsmanship and taking it like a man. And if somebody beat you at something, you're supposed to walk over. And so it really, and there was such a taboo against breaking those norms that it really freed people to play by the rules. And in the military, the great thing was that you were cool if you played by the rules. You were looked down on if you didn't play by the rules. Whereas in my old neighborhood, you played by the rules, you were a victim, So the military was this very cool, alternative, parallel universe all unto itself, and everybody pushed me, everybody.
We have to take just a break. Take a break for just a moment, Deborah, for a public service announcement. To the audience, we'll be right back. Please stay with us.
Before you know it, she talks. Before you know it, she walks. Before you know it, she knows you. Before you know it, she has a heart. Before you know you're pregnant, when your baby's no bigger than a grain of rice, before she's a twinkle in your eye, that's when you need to take folic acid every day. After that, it's too late to prevent some serious birth defects. Folic acid now, before you know it.
It's quite common for landlords to require their tenants to pay a security deposit at the beginning of the lease. And this makes economic sense. Landlords often don't discover that a tenant has damaged a rental unit until the end of the lease, when the tenant is gone and often hard to find. The security deposit can offset some or all of any damage caused by a tenant. But in most states, the law involving security deposits is very complicated, and many landlords unknowingly violate the law. Depending on the state, even an unintentional violation of the security deposit law can have serious consequences. For example, in my state, Massachusetts, even an unknowing violation of the security deposit law can sometimes result in triple damages and the requirement that the landlord pay the tenant's attorney's fees. Although the requirements of security deposit law vary widely from state to state, a couple of common principles apply. For instance, although tenants are required to pay the security deposit to the landlord, the law of most states deems the security deposit to remain the property of the tenant, not the landlord. This means that the landlord can't commingle security deposits in with his or her own funds. Security deposit money must be held separately. Obviously, therefore, more laws follow concerning the type of bank account into which a landlord must place his or her security deposits. Most states also require that landlords accepting security deposits engage in particularized record keeping. While the degree of record keeping varies from state to state, most states require that landlords give receipts for their security deposits and maintain paperwork involving banking information, financial information supporting the use of security deposits to make repairs, and the nature of the damage to which the security deposit is being applied. My best advice to landlords who intend to accept security deposits is to consult an attorney experienced in the landlord-tenant law of your state. Once you know and understand how the security deposit laws work in your state, you'll be able to avoid the pitfalls that uninformed landlords encounter. My advice to tenants is that you too should learn the law of security deposits in your state. Again, most states consider the security deposit to be your money, and you should take reasonable steps to protect your deposit. And once again, an experienced landlord-tenant attorney in your state is the person best qualified to render competent advice on security deposits.
Hello, I'm Stephen Tucker. I practice law with a law firm in Washington, D.C., where I specialize in tax law, estate planning, and real estate law. For many years, I was chairman of the Board of Trustees of Massachusetts School of Law, and I am currently a board member. I would like to tell you why I have served. When I was growing up, my family managed to get by, but it wasn't easy. I always had at least one job from the time I became an early teenager. 40 years ago, law school gave me a chance to do better in life and to benefit not only myself, but also my family, clients, and frankly, my charitable interests. The opportunity to better oneself and to help others is offered today by MSL. I really believe that such an opportunity is immeasurable, and I support MSL precisely because it offers this wonderful opportunity. That is why I serve on and devote a lot of time to the board of MSL.
Welcome back. Deborah, in your book, you talk extensively about the fact that the Air Force gave you manifold opportunities, and that other people who came from similar backgrounds were pushed equally. One fellow was pushed into going to the Air Force Academy, for example. Other people who were pushed similarly. And yet, when all was said and done, after a while you began to feel that, well, of course you were raped, which was a big problem. And you began to feel for that and other reasons that the Air Force could not contain your energies and desires and was not the place for you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you arrived at that conclusion?
Well, I'm not sure how much the rape played into the feeling that I needed to move on. I was raped very early on by a coworker in my own bed on Christmas Day. He confessed, and yet I was ostracized. And he served all of 2 months in military prisons are severe, but they're not nearly dangerous and stuff like. Okay, obviously I'm saying he didn't suffer enough. And our commander, instead of supporting me, he confessed. I was winning all these sorts of awards. I'd only been in the unit 6 weeks. I'd come through all my 2 years of training with flying colors. There was no reason not to support me, but no one did. I was completely ostracized. And he spent 2 months in detention and finished out a military career. He was allowed to wear the uniform and retire, whereas my commander tried to ruin my career. He tried to have me assessed as an alcoholic because I had been drinking on Christmas Day along with his entire unit. And let me tell you something, the military is always drinking. If they're not working, we were always drinking.
And by the way, this is not so much different than the automobile stuff, right?
No.
Because the people in power are coming down on you when you're the victim.
I'm the victim, yeah. With a stellar record behind me. I mean, if you can't support me, who can you support? So that was a very sobering experience. And that taught me more, that did more to radicalize and politicize me about gender issues. Being a minority in the military is nothing. Being a woman in the military is sort of everything. And that, not just the rape, the military wasn't responsible for me being raped, but it was certainly responsible for its response to it, and I really believe it's doing better 12 years, much more than 12, 17 years later. But it was understanding the role that gender played in how far I could go, how much respect I could get. Successful women in the military are routinely minimized as having slept their way to the top or not, or having to be constantly supported and buttressed by other people because they're ditzy, they're this or that. That's still very true. There's a lot of resentment about women getting pregnant as if it's not usually male GIs 99% of the time, you know, who are fathering these children. Very difficult. And just on a social level, being black and 5 to 6 years older than most of my contemporaries because I had been enlisted for 5.5 years, and being very opinionated and very ambitious, it became very clear to me that my odds of marrying and having children were very low, which I think is pretty sexist, you know, given that. And the kind of men I was interested in were not likely to follow me around the world to places like Iceland and interrupt their careers in the way that wives do.
And you were an officer, incidentally, by then.
I was an officer by then, and I had a master's degree, and so I was very ambitious. I was doing very well. I was marked for great things. And in the end, I walked away from it because of that, and also because it was clear that the ambition that the military had really taught me how to formulate and work towards, it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough left that I could do that interested me enough. And I had become very political by then, reading lots of newspapers and articles, and
But you were always political. You simply switched sides.
Yeah, I went from, well, I was an unthinking conservative, and I went to being a thinking, pretty far left liberal. And now I'm a thinking, I don't know what you would call me, right-leaning liberal or left-leaning conservative.
We call ourselves Chads.
And I'm a pregnant one. So, and I had come to really question this simplistic Ronald Reagan, where I was in during both Ronald Reagan terms and George Bush. You know, East, evil, West, you know, wonderful. You know, I had a master's and a bachelor's in political science by this time, and I'm seeing things a little more in a more complicated way. Also, I'm really domestically really starting to understand how doomed from birth most poor people are. And it's as good as it gets in America. You don't even want to think about Afghanistan or someplace. But just understanding what pawns, you know, my family and everybody was to this minority at the top that owns everything and keeps a stranglehold on everything. And that was the era of the Reagan Democrats, you know, who had somehow been convinced to vote against their own best interests and stuff. So I was becoming very, very, very political and thinking that I wanted to do something that had that wasn't just about me, because most of my life had been about getting myself together and moving on. And what about everybody else? So I wanted to find, and I needed a mission. That's the Air Force had worked for me because it gave me a mission. I needed a mission in life, not just to go to work every day and get a paycheck. So I thought I would get out, and I thought I would go into politics at first. And then I spent...
Yeah, you had a terrible, but I think absolutely paradigmatic experience for 1 month or 2 months at the Democratic National Headquarters or something.
Well, I was there, I got January to August when I went off to law school, toying with going into politics. And I thought, well, local level, you know, do stuff on a local level. And so I worked on Clinton's first campaign at the Democrat, and by then I had been very left, and so I thought this is the home for me. And I get to the party, and we led up to the convention, and it was clear victory was in the air. And all I could find people talking, now again, I was at the bottom. It wasn't like I was in the room with Carville and those people. Maybe they were talking about America. But from what I could see, it was all about how you get the cushy assignment in the White House, and whose brother can get me onto this committee, and who at Harvard do you know. It wasn't about people. It was about us enriching ourselves and the black bourgeoisie and again, these were not day in, day out, but when insofar as I could overlap with members of the black political class, again, same. What about the people? You know, do you ever spend any time with anybody who's not just like you? Do you ever, like, you know, Jesse Jackson is famous for going into kitchens and stuff at places. I just wonder how many of these other people do. Why is your, you know, you wave this placard of the poor black people, but what's your program? Affirmative action in Ivy League grad schools?
You call it revolution while shopping. Speaking revolution while shopping at Saks.
Yeah, exactly. And so I became really disgusted with, well, it's not so much disgusted. By then I was a little more mature, and I had less room to be just, okay, this is not for me. I felt dirty. I felt dirty the whole time I was at the DNC. And this isn't for me. I need to be at a more grassroots level. So I'll go to Harvard Law School, where the classes are huge, so there are lots of black people there. And we're going to work for the revolution, and we're going to be in the neighborhoods, and, you know, we're going to be doing all this cool stuff, and we're going to be very community-based. I get to law school, and it's talking revolution while shopping at Saks. You know, what are we protesting? Faculty diversity. Now, I'm all for faculty diversity, but in a world of limited resources, I'm sorry. Okay, you spend your time on that. I'm going to spend my time on community stuff, and we'll meet in the middle. But no, I was an Uncle Tom. You know, I was self-hating. I was a sellout. And, you know, I think the final stage of the civil rights movement is yet to come. And I think the final stage of the civil rights movement is when black people free each other. You know, I mean, we're free from white people mostly, but we're not free from each other. I'm supposed to stand up to white people, but I'm supposed to let some snot-nosed 24-year-old who's never done anything in their life but go to school tell me what I have to think about a political issue?
There was a tremendous amount of enforced uniform thinking, wasn't there?
Right, in the most schoolyard kind of ways, you know. And I didn't go in there thinking I'm going to have to stand my ground against the black bourgeoisie. I went in there thinking we'll debate, we'll meet. The problem I have is not that they don't agree with me. The problem I have is that when they don't agree with me, that makes my sanity suspect. That makes my politics suspect. I'm either a self-hating Uncle Tom who craves the approval of white people or something else ridiculous. And there is this sort of, like, I would make a suggestion that I used to go to Black Law Student Association meetings.
We have to wrap it up.
Oh, no.
Say whatever you want to say, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, I would get hissed. You know, I would make comments or suggestions, or there'd be a chilly silence, and someone would say ominously, I guess she's at the wrong meeting. That's not freedom.
No, ma'am. I want to thank you for being here a second time.
This was fun.
Great. I just really enjoyed having you, and I think it was extremely valuable. To the audience, thank you for being with us. Join us again a couple of weeks from now for the next segment, the next session of MSL Presents A Question of Law. Thank you for being with us, and thank you.